Opening heavy doors, I found myself in an abandoned throne room with a dignified seat of state in the middle. Feeling the weight of emptiness, I thought to myself, when had anyone last been here? Then I saw them again, that noble king and his fiercely protective lion. I would have loved to enjoy the silence here, but instead, it felt oppressive. And as I left the hushed space, now running on faintly echoing stairways, a white phantom appeared. With covered eyes, it whispered to me, even though no sound escaped its tightly shut lips. He was searching for a maiden and kindly offered some grapes. I took them without caring to examine the soft and fruity meat. Suffering a desperate need for air, I ran through dusty corridors and then finally felt a gentle breeze. I was no longer in the castle, but I was not prepared for such brutal beauty. Trying to grasp the scope of this world, I saw a swampy lake which stretched as far as the eye could see, and an enormous palace. Then I noticed someone nearby. It was a maiden named Hyetta, and she looked remarkably like poor Irina, with her eyes covered. Were young women in this world prone to blindness? She asked for some very particular grapes. I gave her the shriveled and squishy fruit found earlier, and did so without much interest in examining my gift. Who was I to judge? We parted ways, and as I rested at the nearby bonfire, evening slowly came along with its first stars. Soothing as that might have been, something behind that ruined church caught my eye, and as I approached the edge, every fibre in my being told me that the familiar island in the midst of that sea of fog was my birthplace into this world. I had to go back. Returning, I came upon an inferior-looking man, dressed in a luxurious robe. He told me about the palace in the swamp. It was the Academy of Raya Lucaria, an institution dedicated to wizardry. It had been sealed off in the wake of some enigmatic cataclysm called the Shattering. Leaving that weakling of a man, I rode north through a dark ravine, only to find myself attacked by soldiers in a nearby camp. After dealing with the underpaid collective of soldiers, I noticed something. A campfire flickered, not far away, and as I crept closer under cover of darkness, I was prepared for trouble. Instead, I found a lone merchant doing no harm. After purchasing a lantern, he kindly invited me to stay until dawn. I did so, and spent the night under a starry sky, dominated by that sacred tree and an eerie moon. Night, however, came with transcendental insight, and with terror I realized that the bonfires along the way were something else altogether. The flame wasn't even fiery, but an aura of light sprouting along roots from the very earth itself. Blindness, it seemed, had other targets than maidens in distress. Then it came back to me.
Summon me by grace, to turn runes into strength.
What could have caused this delusion? Perchance it was residue from whence I had come. All my memories, alas, remained ashen, one of many problems regarding my past. Shaken by it all, and now going into the swamp, unsettling creatures came down on me from ruins in the muddy waters. They wore golden bracelets and diadems, like the nobility of old, and in the back of my mind, something whispered that these ghastly beings had been cursed long ago. They were drowning in darkness. Wandering the swampy streets of a forgotten neighborhood, I saw the cursed wraiths gathering behind arched vaults, silently conspiring to do unholy things. After taking down one of the lesser evils, another monstrosity appeared. Not only was it larger, faster, and more vile, it was also far more terrifying than Margit the Fell, and as it shrieked with a ghastly voice, both unreal and petrifying, I died, and did so more times than I cared to remember. In the wake of that humiliation, a devious thought slowly took hold. Who would know if I just left that hideous creature to its own devices? Surely no one. This was, after all, a barren wetland, filled with nothing but crumbling ruins and distant wailing. And so, I left that spidery nightmare, riding further and crossing poisonous swamps until I came upon a morbid and disquieting sight. Then, a peculiar scarab appeared, Greedily, I grabbed it and felt hidden knowledge engrave itself upon my soul. What had just happened? Slowly approaching the upward path ahead, the hooves of Torrent began to make curious noises. I realized that we were trotting on scorched corpses, pressing blackened flesh into the muddy and dark soil. Something was terribly wrong with this world. The only living thing in this heap of decaying matter was a little crab eating happily away. We continued up the steep path, going past dark figures on their knees, moaning like apparitions forever lost in distant memories. Arriving at a small village, I found a strange and bulgy sack with a shimmering layer of organic skin. And finally, after touching a sight of grace in a dark cabin, I woefully thought to myself, why could I not have gone the other way? Near the ornamented tree, a phantom raised its hands in muffled desperation. It lamented the destruction of the village and implored someone named Albus to hide. Venturing further into the darkness, I came across a tiresome and hooded man who, in vain, sought to scorch me. Approaching an edge, I saw something burning not far away. But on my way over there, I was shocked to find, hiding within an unusual pot, an old bearded man. His name was Albus. He told me about the annihilation of his village and begged me to give, if I ever met her, a medallion to Latenna, seemingly someone of importance. I promised to help him, knowing well that the young woman most likely was lying in a heap of bones. Weary of this gloominess, I turned on my lantern and approached the bridge, just wanting a glimpse of what had caused that fire. Then I would be on my way. Crossing it, I was attacked by survivors of the massacre. Fear had corrupted their ability to reason, and I had to put them down. Then I saw the fire. Next to the flames, a grotesquely large warrior towered, wielding an abject weapon. Trying to ambush it, I was quickly discovered. I stepped backwards, got stuck on a rock, and died. Attacking again and studying it, I realized that there was something about this brutish creature and his two vile dogs that felt eerily familiar. Had I met them before? Finally, upon dealing the death blow, I grasped what had happened here. The monstrosity had wiped out this entire village and burned their remains in the sacred burial site, profaning even their customs. Such blasphemy. This world was broken to its core. Before leaving, I found a gleaming artifact. When I tried to use the object, it broke. Obviously a worthless item of deception. Did anyone really need these? Riding through the poisonous swamp, I picked up some pale lilies. They felt soothing. It was not long, however, before a huge and nightmarish crab emerged from beneath the filthy surface. Fleeing, I soon thereafter passed by an apparition. It whispered of revenge and something called a frenzied flame, its words making me shiver. Nearby I found a slain beast. I hadn't seen one of those since the horrors of Castle Morn. Following bloodstains on the ground, I approached a cabin, and none other than Edgar appeared. Out of thin air he came at me, maddened with blind fury, attacking with the ruthless power of a father out for revenge, not even knowing who I was. In the end, I had to kill him. Among his belongings, I found some of those curious grapes that the blind maiden had enjoyed. Perhaps he would finally be at peace, maybe even with his beloved Irina. But I had my doubts. And as I rose that morning, I noticed the academy in the distance. Remembering the field glass I bought earlier, I closely studied its towers. I had to go there. Disheartened by Edgar's untimely death, I headed out and rode moodily into the swamp, with its early morning fog slowly evaporating. Then something materialized very close by, a magnificent dragon, slumbering in front of sparkling treasures. I froze, unable to breathe or move. Finally, I broke the spell. Getting behind that terrifying beast, I discovered a key of the very sort that Tobbs had described. Maybe I had been unjust. Meanwhile, the dragon had awakened. Still, it couldn't see me, even if it felt my presence nearby. It was old. Killing such an elderly creature of the sky would surely be indecent. Pleased with my benevolence, I rode south, trying to locate an entrance to the academy. This city of old had been broken by time. Where had its people gone? As I found heavily barricaded stairs leading up, I felt that dreadful anger blossom once again, and killing every guard in sight, I came upon a grotesque moving head with a glowing and disfigured tongue. Before I knew it, the foul head spewed flames without regard for even its companions. At this point, I noticed somebody within it. A grey and scrawny fellow sat inside, apparently moving it with some devilish machinery. I jumped onto an overgrown and empty fountain, shielding myself from its warm embrace. But I could hardly believe my eyes. The wretched soldier inside the moving head was so inbred that he lost any will to pursue me. Lazily, he allowed me to finish my business with him and put the remaining guards to sleep. It became apparent that I was getting close, and as I touched a shimmering blue gate, I found myself brought to another place entirely. From here you could see it all. 4 peculiar towers rose in the west, and the north boasted an enigmatic wooded area with steep cliffs. But what truly made me gasp was the enormous fortress far away. It even seemed to touch the very Erd tree itself. Entering an old mechanical lift, I was pushed up and eventually came to an opening shrouded in mist. And then I saw it, the Academy of Raya Lucaria in all its glory. Standing next to a broken statue, I was in awe of the stately towers that rose into the air. I couldn't help but notice 2 things. First, that wild plant life was putting its mark on this glorious school. And second, that the academy had a fondness for birds. Going up some nearby stairs, I noticed 2 sorcerers wearing absurdly large masks. Oh, how they glared at me. Desperately trying to shield myself, I wasn't able to make a move, as their attacks locked me with a stunning force. Raya Lucaria was evidently not, despite its undeniable beauty, entirely welcoming. Enraged by their stupefying magics, I fiercely tore into these sharpshooting wizards. Opening the heavy door, I came upon a wondrous and church-like building, but with curiously clad creatures falling out of cages and coming straight at me. I decided not to engage in what would most likely be a naive attempt at dialogue. Outside, I recognized the full extent of the eeriness of this place, and I ran like a madman, crossed a bridge, escaped vile dogs, and finally reached a remote site of grace. The quiet room contained all sorts of objects, but I found myself drawn to some crystals. Were they spreading? In a nearby corridor, I found scholars, reading. After dealing with these book-wielding lovers of words, I looked at the corpses strewn across the floor and wondered in silence. Who had they been prior to this miserable ending? Had they been at peace with themselves? Resting in the quiet space with the remarkable crystals, I was bothered by a creaking of heavy wooden machinery. Then I remembered. I had, in my escape from the dogs, jumped onto a peculiar contraption. Realizing now that it also had to go down somewhere, my curiosity was ignited, and down I went. As I jumped from the wooden lift, I almost stumbled on a corpse, but regaining my footing, I was snatched by a hideously large iron maiden, seemingly alive and hungry. I was crushed in its soft and boiling stomach. But I didn't wake up in the chamber. Instead, I found myself suffocated by immense heat. I saw old metal carcasses in a lake of lava. I ran on and noticed countless cages hung high. Only God knew with what purpose. I sat down, crushed by the only meaningful thought which came to mind. I had gone to hell. At last I got up and gazed at the inferno below me, considering my options. I investigated my surroundings and found a stony path leading me away. Going ever deeper, I arrived at an underground chamber, where I was attacked by outright hideous creatures who had a sticky white substance for blood. There was nothing down here, except for heat and fire. I was lost in a hellish place, but in the midst of this dark hour, I remembered friendly words spoken long ago.
Let my hand rest upon you, for but a moment.
Recognizing that I could return to Roundtable Hold by mere will, I touched grace and was carried through time and space. I was back. But a door tightly locked during my last visit was now open, and from within, the shape of something dreadful could be glimpsed. I entered the dark chamber, and from its shadows 2 hideously large and hairy fingers revealed themselves. Next to that ghastly thing was another revolting being. Looking at me with big and hollow eye sockets, she introduced herself as a finger reader. Unable to ignore her ghoulish appearance, most of her hoarse words escaped my attention. My besting of Godric had apparently set something in motion. Other than that, I understood nothing. I conversed with the other inhabitants of the sanctuary. Gideon, bothersome and arrogant as always, welcomed me into their midst, and upon meeting a dashingly clad sorcerer, I was also taught how to spin a weapon with impressive speed. But by far most importantly, I met gentle Roderica again. Somehow, she had found her way to the stronghold, becoming a part of this community. Nothing could have brought me more joy. Well, almost nothing. Touching Grace, I once again found myself at the academy, and walking past the broken bodies, I noticed a painting of a tall lady wearing a rather curious thing on her head. Within minutes, I stood in front of another shimmering yellow wall and braced myself before entering. An enormous red wolf was in there, staring at me with evil intent. The ensuing fight made a mockery of my skills. Wielding a glowing red sword in its mouth, it slashed me. Then it did some biting, and finally it jumped down on me. My journey had required me to build strength to wield such heavy gear as the magnificent shield. But even with that, I couldn't withstand the beast. Its blindingly quick movements were too fast for my slow approach. If I were to survive, I had to be vile. I knew what outrageous and shameful weapon had to be used, even if I had repressed the memory of finding it. During my days of murdering sleeping servants in Stormvale Castle, I found a most cursed weapon. Having engulfed it with flames, I ran past the wolf's cowardly magics. Then I tore into the damn thing and made it bleed. Still, its powerful bite threw me to the ground, and I had to resort to the most unbecoming of war tactics, avoiding the attacks altogether. Dodging like a simpleton, I felt like a peasant dancing at a mating ritual in some remote village. The wolf became increasingly desperate, and must have felt the tide turning, because it threw itself at me with all of its many-colored tricks at its disposal. Continuing with this sacred dance ritual of avoidance and punishment, it became obvious to both the wolf and me that it was looking into the oblivion of nothingness. Knowing that I would never be pure again, I shredded the wolf, and felt truly tarnished. Wandering the parlor, glowing letters whispered, "Why is it always weak foe?" Apparently, even trolls had acquired the skills to taunt over great distances. After removing the filthy claws, I looked at my surroundings, impressed by the luxury of this ancient academy. And entering a large open courtyard, I became intoxicated by the glorious view of the towers. Here were undead noblemen digging in the dirt, while others stood and silently glared toward the sky. Then I heard something, and I nearly lost control of all senses. Desperate to avoid that hellish place again, I ran, jumped onto some stonework, and from a safe distance mocked the unattractive maiden. While running up broad stairs, out of nowhere an enormous ball of iron came down on me, and as I tried to steer right, it crushed me again. Realizing how bothersome those stairs were, I decided that I would much rather look elsewhere. Seeing another viable path, I took a sigh of relief. On it were sorcerers wearing their laughable masks, and after dealing with those scholarly fools, I jumped onto rooftops, discovering even more bird cages. Why would they need this many? It didn't make sense. Shortly thereafter, I found one of the masks. Who would even wear a thing like that? Was it perchance a question of unsavory sensations? Inside again, I danced with a masked hoodlum and eventually saw a most unsettling sight. A pile of something which resembled enormous masks had somehow grown together with eerie crystals. I tried to look inside their mouths. Alas, nothing but pitch-black darkness. Finally, while investigating a nearby ceiling, I found another glintstone key and was instantly reminded of an old acquaintance who wanted to return here. Having been inconsiderate, I decided to gift him something which would change his life forever. Riding south and searching for the church where kind-hearted Thobs had been, I eventually came upon a camp, which in turn led me to an unexpected cave entrance. A large open space revealed itself, and in this darkness I was ambushed by several nasty critters who all lunged at me at the same time from different directions. However, in the end, it was a somewhat larger animal that got the better of me. Returning with a bruised ego, I killed it without feeling vindicated. How could I have let such a creature defeat me? One lonely beast remained. It went around me in circles, not showing any interest in an actual skirmish. Did it know that I had killed its tribe? It jumped angrily into the air, screaming like a spoiled toddler, and at last decided to join its brethren. But noticing how the cave went even deeper, I heard muffled voices from far below. At the bottom, several crystal-infected snails came at me, and as I jumped even further into the otherworldly darkness, I saw the remains of unfortunate and long-dead travelers. Then shimmering walls appeared, and I found myself wooed by a hideous knight wielding both a curved greatsword and strange claws. It moved like a hound on all fours, and the shape of its helmet seemed to suggest a grossly disfigured head. It tried again and again, but to no avail. I became a wall it couldn't surmount, and my experience with the glorious shield humiliated the beastly knight. After the just annihilation, I could feel fresh air entering my lungs as I proceeded towards the light. Outside, it came into view again, my birthplace into this strange world. Something else caught my attention, though, and I saw a female warrior resting next to an imposing wolf. Approaching the shack and the unlikely couple resting there, the female warrior addressed me in a soft, resentful voice.
What do you want?
She asked what I wanted and mentioned an all-hearing brute who had apparently interrogated her in search of a medallion. Memories flooded me, and I was reminded of the old man in the slaughtered Albinoric village shrouded in perpetual darkness. He had entrusted me with half of a medallion, and I, believing her to be long dead, had promised to give it to an enigmatic woman named Latenna. Was this she?
Do you speak true?
Immediately recognizing it, the woman revealed herself to be none other than Latenna.
I'm Latenna. My apologies for my...
After apologizing for her initial hostility, she mentioned the all-hearing brute again. Who was she talking about? Then she came with a rather obtrusive request and asked me to take her to a land where something called Michaelis Haligtree was located. Upon accepting her proposal with a deep sense of resignation, she mentioned that the other half of the medallion was located in a castle on the mountaintops of the giants. I had never heard of such a place, and even worse, I was a stranger to this world. Was she simply unable to grasp the preposterous magnitude of her wish? In the end, she parted with her slumbering wolf and vanished from sight, while whispering that she would lend me her strength when needed.
And I will fight at your side.
Resting quietly for a while next to the magnificent wolf, I realized that I didn't have the slightest idea how to summon her. I had never been prone to sorcery, and was apparently in need of esoteric knowledge. Finally, out of the swamp, I passed through the soldiers' camp and gleefully destroyed what I hoped was meant as their evening meal. Leaving the darkness of the ravine behind, I eventually arrived at the church and found that gentle soul sitting where I had left him.
You're willing to give your glintstone key to me.
Glad I could help, and then gifting him the key, I felt humbled by his soft-spoken gratitude.
Now I can go back to the academy to resume my study of glintstone sorceries. And the very stars.
What a noble pursuit, a path without an ounce of selfishness or dreams of riches and power. Maybe the terrible forces of evil in this world wouldn't necessarily be victorious in the end. Heading out again, I felt joy spark deep within me and thought cheerily to myself that he was going to be all right. And once again, I reached the moist and swampy terrain. As I tried to avoid most of the unpleasant inhabitants of the wetlands, I sought inland while keeping the shoreline in sight. An abandoned ruin intrigued me, but as I approached the sorry remains of that ancient structure, I found myself confronted by a scrawny fellow with an unhealthy appearance. Wielding a sword, and more importantly, a horn, he needed to be dealt with immediately. This crumbling site wasn't unoccupied after all. I had come upon a band of weary soldiers resting in the soothing shade of the ruin. Not even able to consider my options, I was swept aside by base instinct and immediately terminated the heavy-eyed man on my left. Within minutes, most of the deplorables were gone, and I noticed that something was off. Boards had been put on top of what seemed to be a hidden entrance. Embraced by the darkness of the underground stairway, I felt the temperature drop sharply with every step. In the dank basement, I found a valuable heirloom of gold. Moreover, there was one of those grapes cherished by the fragile and blind maiden who had desperately sought to regain her vision. Breathing freely again in the warm air, I felt a sudden chill upon seeing an almost transparent apparition in the blinding rays of the summer sun. Surrounded by plants and grass rustling in the wind, it whispered without moving its lips about maidens and offering eyes. Maybe those words had made sense long ago. Now, however, they were nothing but faint echoes from a time forgotten by even the land itself. Soon I would have to return to the academy, but as I contemplated the coming days, something tore into me out of nowhere. I turned to a disgustingly overgrown animal. That foul creature wouldn't know what he... Seething with hatred, I cursed the terrain and the slippery ground, which obviously had caused this, and decided to sneak the other way around. Inside yet another of these crumbling ruins scattered across the land, a lonely figure stood in the shadows without moving a muscle. Approaching, I realized it was a maiden, one I had seen before.
Hello? Is someone there? Would you donate any Shabiri grapes in your possession to me? I'm on a pilgrimage, in search of the distant light, and when I eat one of those grapes, I can feel the light in the back of my eyes.
Giving her another of those ghastly grapes I found utterly repulsive myself, she began to talk in riddles.
You're not like the others who give me grapes, are you? They rest their trembling hands upon me. Howling wordlessly, they gently stroke my eyes. Their frail fingers, emaciated. Yet still, they give me the grapes. But you seem somehow firmer.
Was she even sound of mind? As I considered her frail mental state, she thanked me, wishing me blessings from the fingers. Finally on the road again, I headed north, this time set on actually returning to the academy without distractions. And it felt good. Torrent had become, if not family, then at the very least a dear friend. We were now bound to each other, a quaint couple if there ever was one. Passing by fleshy and blister-filled pods spewing poison, I witnessed the sun disappear in seconds, making way for a heavy fog that covered the wetlands with disquieting speed. Upon returning to the barricaded stairs leading to the academy, I came across an overgrown bridge with what seemed to be a disagreeable creature, at least from a distance. It turned out to be another finger reader, like the one lurking in the shadows of Roundtable Hold. This one was dressed differently, but just as nauseating to behold.
Please, I can read them. Your fingers, please, your fingers.
Did that ghastly crone want to touch my fingers?
Oh, bless you.
This felt wrong. She proceeded to speak words that, like others in her unsightly order, were incomprehensible to any sane person, yet something did spark my interest.
Slaughter. Slaughter. The all-hearing slaughtered. But alas, it was for naught.
She mentioned the all-hearing.
But
Latenna had spoken of a Tarnished who went by that name. It sounded as if that culprit had been responsible for the gruesome massacre at the village. I felt violated. That ugly old hag seemed contagious, and only God knew what illness she bore inside the withering sack of worms that was her body. Hastening away from that foul-mouthed relic, I suddenly longed to see Thobs again. Most likely, I would find him working at strange contraptions made for gazing at the night sky. But all of a sudden, I felt fierce stabs of pain and froze. He had not even been let into their halls of learning, but had instead been allowed a measly and old wooden desk outside, in the most damp and noisy part of the entire academy. They did not want him here. They never did. And when they were forced to open their doors, they killed him off like vermin. They needed to be punished, all of those filthy sorcerers. And as I came down on them in a frenzied fury, they cried out in pain and surprise when I ended them. Mad with rage, I made no attempt to proceed carefully, and merely ran past that rolling ball of iron, making a note to deal with whoever made that trap. Looking for someone to hurt, I tried a door in vain. And then, finally, I saw an opulently clad knight with an anything but friendly demeanor. This was what I needed. The fight began, but as I easily blocked and countered the suspiciously well-dressed knight's attacks, and did so several times, I knew that this warrior wouldn't be too much trouble in the end. With victory only seconds away, I realized that this knight was nothing but glitter and gold without an ounce of actual skill. Or so I thought. As it turned out, this flamboyant creature did, much to my surprise, present quite the challenge after all. But after countless of meaningless humiliations, I decided to mimic the knight's obnoxious approach of deflection. I prefer not to speak of those hours, because they went on, and I died while the knight performed a froggish dance taunting my lack of competence. Eventually, though, I learned how to use that smallish shield I'd awakened with in the faraway chapel. As I finally landed it, my body shivered with profane sensations of pleasure. Sadly, though, the knight had filthy sorceries up the sleeve, and the gruesome ordeal of failed attempts didn't end. I learned the knight's particular moves, gave in to repetition upon repetition as hours became days. But then at last, the hour had come, and my great sword finally pierced this tedious knight with an otherwise impeccable taste in clothing. Again, and with a devilish grin, I treated the knight with the very move that had been performed countless times on me. That was the spot. Impure sensations flowed through me, making me both gasp and laugh as the poor knight was finally rewarded with proper treatment. In vain, the knight tried to counter my moves, but was out of luck. No one was looking out for that poor creature anymore. That well-dressed warrior belonged to me now. A couple of ever-so-brief mistakes on my part made way for a puny retaliation, but I didn't notice because of the bliss. I was too far gone in the heat of the moment, and never even thought about them until afterward. And then, without me even knowing it, I had worn the knight down. Oh, sweet relief. For the longest time, I just stood there, listening to the sounds of the academy, wondering who that knight had been and what needed to be defended with such rigor. The answer seemed obvious. It was whatever waited at the other end of that mechanical device. Being in need of a moment of rest before venturing any further, I was ambushed by a hidden sorcerer. Dealing with that cowardly creature in the only befitting way, I grinned as the masked villain was put to sleep, and upon changing back to my far more protective shield, I noticed a ladder going up. What was going on up here? This was from whence that ball of iron originated, and I had somehow found the deviant scoundrels responsible. Oh my, this was a most fortunate development. And just like that, I tore into one of those bullish creatures wearing a pumpkin for a helmet. It didn't take long, and after I had killed the sole remaining weakling, I kept on hitting its disgusting corpse. I wanted to smash his head in, revive that vile scholar, and kill him once more, but this time with an ever so slight hint of barbarism. After that ever so satisfying moment, I came upon an outlandish helmet resembling a scarab. Not only were the sorcerers of the Academy murderers of scholarly integrity and kindness, but they were also off-putting and bizarre. No, I wouldn't dream of touching such a device again. Thus, I came back to the lift, going God knew where. I wanted to know exactly what treasures that annoyingly well-dressed knight had guarded, and stepped onto the finely ornamented apparatus, setting it into motion. Now was the time for certainty. I needed to know. The great doors, so heavy that I could hardly open them on my own, led me to an imposing and dark room with an extravagantly woven carpet. 'Twas a library with towering stacks of books, and fittingly enough, no sound could be heard anywhere. As I walked preoccupied with the sheer size of the place, I stepped on something soft. What the? I had come upon a young woman, it seemed, but something was not right, and all around me, identical figures appeared in the slowly dissolving darkness. They all crawled on the floor. Did they not have legs? What were these creatures? And then, these alarming and juvenile scholars all turned their heads in unison upward toward the ceiling.
Hush, little Calva.
What ghastly thing was that lady stroking?
I'll soon birth thee anew, a sweeting, fresh and pure.
How delightful. A friendly face for once. And just like that, all hell broke loose, and the library transformed into an unreal battleground. Were they throwing books at me? The sword was, contrary to the naive belief of olden days, actually mightier than the pen. Even so, the glowing youngsters still kept throwing their volumes at me. Punishing another of those bothersome students, I suddenly heard the shimmering shield around the sorceress crack. I had found the key to engage her in the sobering dialogue of the sword. Still, as I hit her again and again, I couldn't help but feel a smidgen of doubt. Was I trespassing in a single mother's sanctuary dedicated only to literature and her children? And so, it went on. While dealing with those insolent youths didn't feel particularly dangerous, it was maddening, like tedious work performed in the service of a boorish master. But in the end, that abnormally tall sorceress moaned with pain as I delivered one final blow. Yet for some inexplicable reason, she remained alive, albeit suffering. The now desperate mother crawled on all fours, trying to reach the shimmering and hideous mass that had previously been in her arms.
My beloved, have no fear. I will hold thee. Patience. Ye will be countless born, forever and ever.
It changed form, and soon black smoke rose from it, giving way to a poisonous-looking cloud and an hitherto unknown voice, calling the sorceress both Rennala and Mother.
Upon my name as Ranni the Witch. Mother's rich slumber shall not be disturbed by thee. Foul trespasser. Send word far and wide. Of the last queen of Caria, Rennala of the full moon. And the majesty of the night she conjureth.
I couldn't believe my eyes. An unrelenting force unlike anything else disintegrated me, and I offered no more resistance than a speck of dust. Never before had I encountered such unhinged power. Enough with this chivalrous behavior of mine. That malevolent and moon-loving mother of degenerate offspring needed to be bled. Sadly, I became embarrassingly familiar with the path leading up to that hideous creature of the Academy, and was punished in so many ways in the process. Yet for some reason I didn't care anymore, and could have touched the shimmering wall hundreds of times without being bothered 1 ounce. Knowing full and well how eventually I was going to get that obscenely tall sorceress in the end was all that I needed. Truth of the matter was that most likely it would be a relief for her to depart with this grisly world, her obvious emotional issues considered. Never had I seen such lifeless and peculiarly incomplete beings. Were they even alive? This was treating them with kindness their deviant mother wouldn't bestow upon them. Such were the thoughts that fleetingly entered my mind as I shredded the sorceress with the filthy claws. But this time I wanted to burn her as well as bleed her. Finally, we were dancing for the very last time, and I tore into her as she performed that fiendish witchcraft. The only thing to do in this empty space, with nothing but the night sky, was to go for her, again and again. Getting desperate, she conjured an esoteric sign on the surface of the water and summoned an enormous troll, effectively forcing me to retreat and catch my breath. Maybe she secretly yearned to be set free, and with offspring like that, who could truly blame her? As if her company on its own wasn't bad enough, she now conjured a radiant moon, glowing with a sickly and most unnatural light. It was getting tedious, this entire ordeal. Avoiding her cowardly magic had merely become a question of shady dodging. What honor was there in such dullard games, preferred by peasants and other simpletons? Attempting one last summoning, she wretchedly called forth one of those ghastly knights moving like hounds. The only benefit from this playful approach was the fact that I got to bleed her, and in the end, that was how I bested that off-putting sorceress.
Oh, little Ranni, my dear daughter, weave thy night into being.
Who was Ranni? I realized that her daughter somehow had been present, protecting her from afar. As I returned to the Academy from that enigmatic space within, I found her sitting there, talking soothingly, and holding the glowing egg of amber in her lap.
Where did he flee, my sweetings? Come out from whence ye hide. There are books and light aplenty, dither not. Come out, say I, or will ye be gravestones?
What was she even saying? Was she utterly mad?
Is it thy wish to be born anew? To become a sweeting? Reborn of my beloved egg?
I wanted no such thing. But as she sat there all by herself with that curious egg of amber in her lap, I almost felt sorry for her. After trying to pry open a locked chest nearby, something caught my eye. A statue of someone strung up with open arms, all the while being consumed by what seemed to be roots. Unable to deal with this place anymore, and its clearly disturbed residents, I took my leave and headed out of the Academy. I had no idea where I was going, but Thops's death didn't feel resolved, nor had shredding that crazed mother now mumbling to herself given me the peace I had hoped for. Finally outside again, breathing delightfully fresh air and looking at the bluest sky, I noticed an alluring castle high up in volcanic mountains. Surely such a well-defended fortress would contain riches and beauty beyond belief. Upon carefully touching a blue seal shimmering in the air, I found myself transported to a foggy and overgrown highway. I had apparently been sent to the other end of the broken Academy bridge. From here, I could see the tall towers looming majestically. Everything was covered in a thick and damp layer of fog. But I was drawn to some curious and loud noises. What in heaven's name was that? Was that building moving of its own accord? The weather hindered a more thorough investigation, so I returned to the site of grace, wanting to study my surroundings better. Lo and behold, 'twas another one of those obscene grannies from that stomach-turning cult dedicated to the monstrous, hairy fingers.
You, please, I can read them. Your fingers, please, your fingers.
This one was moaning as well. Who would even trust such a crone?
What a pity.
Were there actually people who felt gentleness towards such a disease-ridden carrier of foul odors?
All you can do is stand at a loss without.
She mentioned that I didn't have the right, but the right to what exactly? I could not tell. I did, however, manage to understand one thing hissed from within the toothless and black pit that was her mouth. There was apparently a grand lift somewhere ahead of me. I found it more likely for peace to reign in these lands than for her to hold her tongue. Leaving the rambling hag behind, I noticed that the weather had improved significantly. Why not revisit the source of that god-awful noise? Oh my goodness. I almost refused to accept what I now saw with my own eyes. A huge stony creature wandering the wetland with an exquisite building on its head. Or was the building perhaps its actual head? Feeling a primal need to witness this magnificent spectacle up close, I steered Torrent down the gust of wind nearby. This was, without a doubt, the strangest thing I had ever seen. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of a poor traveler encountering such a creature unprepared. Having left that lone wandering building only seconds ago, we now observed peculiar lights coming from an unlikely source. Upon further inspection, it became obvious that it was an opening leading into the mountain. I was in need of a proper night's sleep at a decent campfire. Maybe this mine would fulfill at least some of my wishes. As the wooden lift came to a halt, a couple of things stood out. There were lights down here, and fresh air flowed through hidden channels. It was at this point that I drifted into sleep, and found myself running through the now empty corridors of the academy. It was dark, and the scholars were nowhere to be found. Then, my soul was suddenly pierced with pain as I was confronted with the red wolf I had so heinously slaughtered. I sat by its feet for the longest time, suffering its resentful gaze which tore into my innermost self. Desperately gasping for air as I awoke in the mine, I heard distant and familiar voices coming from somewhere.
Is somebody there?
They had to be faint echoes from my dream. One thing was certain. Something was waiting for me in these dark tunnels. I found the first couple of inhabitants just inside the mine. They turned out to be strange creatures with crystals growing on their wrinkled skin, and for some reason they seemed surprisingly resistant to my sword. I grabbed some of the valuable smithing stones and ventured further into the tunnels, my mind now set on exposing whatever was waiting for me. Finding some unremarkable materials left me indifferent, but there was a connection between these cracked crystals and the creatures I had just met. Coming across some preoccupied miners and what seemed to be a guardian of sorts, I disposed of the latter and gave my undivided attention to the remaining workers. Surely they would secretly applaud being set free from this infernal prison. Why would anyone even try that? The mine was massive, and below me I could see bright flashes from a prisoner performing his tiresome labor. The entire place felt overwhelming, and way down at the bottom of this enormous hole in the mountain, something golden could faintly be glimpsed. Going ever deeper into the tunnels, I kept coming upon more of those crystal-infected slaves. I dealt with them, cursing the way my sword seemed harmless down here. Had it not been for my trusted shield, then these inarticulate creatures would have caused me trouble. The only miner remaining hadn't noticed anything at all, and just stood there, blindly repeating motions that had apparently become instinct. Did that ugly creature even possess the ability to reproduce, or was he conjured from the very mountain itself? In the end, it didn't matter. Such an abomination shouldn't be left alive. If you could even call it that. Going further down and running across anxiety-inducing heights, I felt fatigued. Only just noticing something dangling from the ceiling, I recognized peculiar creatures I had encountered in the academy. Contrary to my first assumption, they did not drop out of cages. It had merely seemed that way. How utterly quaint. In wake of the assault, I felt a stinging pain from an arrow that had pierced my armor. But as I proceeded, cursing the unsightly creatures resembling badly wrought iron cages, I was just glad I hadn't taken one to the knee. Curious as to what to expect, I impatiently touched the shimmering wall and entered an opening in the lowest depths of the mountain. In the middle of what looked like a pile of golden dust, a strange warrior waited for me. The battle began, and as the unsightly fellow threw himself at me, I thought to myself that this chance meeting was more outlandish than outright dangerous. He was all but blue and literally glowed while wielding a large round weapon of a kind I had never seen before. Just as I began to consider the fight both dull and tiresome, the colorful warrior somehow managed to tumble me over. My vanity had been tainted by that glowing imbecile. Again, my sword was but a shadow of its former self, but eventually I broke his defenses and angrily tore into him. And just like that, the strange being, which clearly originated from a country far away, was dust. Finding a strange item after my defeat of the impotent warrior, I let the ensuing silence flow over me. The mind felt empty. There was really nothing down here. What had I even been looking for in these god-forsaken tunnels? And yet there was something intangible right here. I could feel it. 'Twas as if I could hear the earth itself, humming distantly. Returning to the entrance and leaving the mine, I felt fresh air enter my lungs with a welcoming sharpness. And again, I was struck by the beauty of this gruesome world, which contained both nameless horrors and kind-hearted fragility. Deciding to return from whence I had come before entering the mountain, Torrent and I made our way back. Within minutes, I began to contemplate what I had seen. My mind was preoccupied with that strange, round object dropped by the hopeless would-be assailant back in the mines. It reeked of power, and oh, how I wanted to harness it for my own gain. Accidentally eyeing the hideous crone, I was reminded of Roundtable hold. If anyone could enlighten me, it was most likely those eccentric individuals. Touching the site of grace, I was transported through time and space and promptly felt soothed. Such was the effect of this sanctuary. But for some reason, I did not feel like talking to pompous Gideon right away. Instead, I sought out the twin grannies, equally mute and ghastly. While I did enjoy the silence, we communicated without words, and I discovered that the mysterious item contained the key to valuable smithing stones. I bought quite a few, being in want of even more powerful weapons as I was. Now, who was this lovely creature?
I've not seen you here before. I am Nefeli Lu.
And thus I became acquainted with a most stunning warrior.
The pleasure's mine.
Had it not been for my rigorous self-discipline, I would have had eyes only for her smooth, soft skin, and might have even lost myself in her delightful voice.
I wonder if you've met my foster father. If you haven't already, I advise you introduce yourself. Father is leader of the Roundtable.
What?
I'm sure talking to him will be worth your while.
Was this magnificent being related to Gideon?
It's about time I headed off. I'll see you again, warrior.
Mercifully, I wasn't smitten with tender feelings or profane desires. Talking to her father only seconds after being, well, impressed by that vibrant and lean warrior felt slightly inappropriate.
Make the journey to the capital.
Once again he mentioned the Elden Ring, but this time my besting of the sorceress in the academy seemed to strengthen his determination.
You may be our best hope. Find your way to the Elden Ring.
Asking about Rennala, I was gifted with scandalous knowledge.
Her beloved Radagon left her to become Queen Marika's second husband.
She had been left by a debauchery-loving husband. Oh, how lovely. Now I felt even more sorry for that wretched mother of lifeless offspring. Talking to a peculiarly dressed man of faith, I was tempted by his offer, an incantation engulfing my hands in fire. There was something delightfully cruel about that notion. It made me tremble with subtle sensations of lust. I not only wanted my enemies to bleed, I also wanted them to burn. This was not esoteric magic, but rather a sacred bond with the forces of Earth itself. He then schooled me in his uncanny ways, and I was taught how to use something called a seal, an item I later bought from the unbecoming twin maidens. I also visited the ghastly Granny, who moaningly implored me to seek the Erd Tree and Queen Marika. All of them seemed obsessed with me becoming Elden Lord, whatever that entailed. Parting ways, she gifted me with a talisman pouch, and I sighed with relief as I left her nauseating company. Finally, I could put my smithing stones to use, and the brutish smithing master improved my abominable hook claws and the strange seal. Returning at long last to where I had left off, I continued north through a ruinous church and eventually wound up near an enemy camp. Brimming with aggression and a newfound sense of self, I put my claws to good use on those small bugs resembling men. But I also felt audacious, and trying out the seal with the fire incantation took my breath away. It was pleasing, even pleasurable. The fire from within me scorched those poor soldiers, and the stench of burned skin entered my lungs, but the sensations of joy were undeniable. Among the dead vermin, I found something magnificent, a great mace, slightly tarnished, and with an alluring heaviness. It felt so right in my hands. Oh, how I had to crush someone with this glorious weapon, someone beautiful preferably. Having approached the barricades on the other side of the road, I stood in the rain for the longest time, allowing it to drench me completely. Being in no particular hurry, I wanted to enjoy the looks on their faces as I came thundering down upon them. Finally, one of the remaining soldiers noticed me and blew a puny horn, calling forth some brothers in arms. Appreciating their long-awaited arrival, I relished how great the mace felt as it crushed their skinny, foul-smelling bodies into ground meat. Letting the mace run its natural course, another one of those sickly creatures let go. He didn't even get to consider his demise. 'Twas unfortunate. I also came upon a knight casting a detestable enchantment on his sword. Apparently his small metal branch wasn't strong enough on its own. I did not have trouble in that regard. Generously leaving the corpses to the birds, I headed north and realized that I could now see the lift mentioned by the ghastly Granny. It was grand, and I couldn't help but be impressed by the sheer scope of the construction. Had giants worked on this back in ancient times? How else would anyone have been able to create something of this magnitude? It was humbling, that much was certain. As I approached the monumental stonework from so long ago, a single statue caught my attention. Who did it depict? It was different from the riders who loomed over me. Running up the enormous stairs, I crossed into a half-open space where two imposing guardians stood in front of the lift. There were also eerily large roots. They had to come from trees of unreal proportions. It was difficult to fathom, but logic dictated that this entire plateau was merely at the root level of whatever splendid trees grew far above. Surely these roots didn't come from the Erd Tree itself. As I got closer, I could see how the guardians were made of stone and protected the lift with crossed weapons. It didn't work. The toothless Granny spewing nonsense had been right after all. There was nothing but pitch-black emptiness on the other side, and feeling a distinct urge to drown myself in that void of tender relief, I forced myself to venture back. Coming upon an apparition on my way out of this abandoned space, I listened to its silent words and was reminded of another path leading to the capital. An ancient tunnel, hidden from sight. Oh, the joy. Going southward again on Torrent and grabbing another of those worthless golden trinkets, I tried to jump some bothersome cliffs. The only thing I actually attained by doing this was a sense of being daft. It was here that I realized how to approach that alluring area on the horizon. I had to return to the wetlands and journey west. Approaching the gust of wind, I accidentally happened to fleetingly touch the toothless crone, making her whine like an insolent child. Heading west through the swampy land of the Academy, Torrent finally led me to more rocky terrain. On solid ground again, we found yet another map and a site of grace. Within minutes I was approaching an ancient ruin. Not really feeling like having tedious confrontations in the shade of a bygone culture, there sadly seemed to be no other way. And yes, as was the custom in the lands between, these ruins were indeed haunted. Hitting one of the rude sorcerers revealed, by happy chance, a hidden entrance leading underground to a shimmering wall. In the dank basement, I came upon a particularly nasty creature I had encountered once before, and avoided. With good reason, I might add, for it was horrendous and frightening, shrieking foul curses with the face of a disfigured mortal, and a spidery body composed of twisted human limbs. The finger-loving grannies and this toxic creature would make a well-matched beast with two backs. This time I was prepared, and began to crush the diseased and fleshy creature with my mace. It tried to poison me with its green spittle. That did not, however, diminish the delight I felt after each meaty thud. As it failed an attempt to flee, I finally crushed the now soft and pulpy creature into bits. Leaving the messy scene behind, I found a thrusting sword in a chest at the back, cold and with a rather recognizable shape. Going outside again, I showed mercy upon a couple of sorcerers, thereby accidentally stumbling into another hidden wall. It seemed as if I, by some fortunate event, had found a passage leading north. But who was that burly gentleman? Hesitantly, I began a friendly conversation with this somber creature. I was surprised to discover that he had a charming way about him.
I am E.G., a blacksmith who once served the Carian royals.
Remembering what Gideon had told me about the mad sorceress of the Academy and her being queen of the Carian royals, I gathered there had to be some connection.
My trade on this spot. Perhaps you'd like a display?
After saying goodbye to that kind-hearted and, truth be told, gentle troll, I took a moment to study the thrusting sword found in the chest. And as my eyes wandered to the eerie and wooded area leading to the mysterious fortress, I decided to try it out, even if it felt like a tiny needle. Journeying north, it turned out, wasn't entirely without issues, seeing as I was attacked within seconds by vile sorceries conjured out of the sky itself. Someone, it seemed, would rather that I died than let me explore the foreign land ahead. In the end, Torrent, along with its nimble movements and true instincts, saved me, and we eventually made it to a site of grace near the front gate. From here, I could see it all, and found myself looking at an overgrown manor with statues and strange crystals sporadically growing from the very earth. It felt as if I had entered another world entirely, with this open area being covered in an enigmatic mist. This place had an ominous beauty to it. Who lived within this forgotten and walled garden? As I noticed movement near an ancient and overgrown fountain, I froze. What was that? Ghoulish-looking hands seemingly torn off and moving about without a care in the world. As shadows appeared in front of me, I nearly defecated on the spot as enormous cousins of those wandering hands fell on me. I retreated, threatening them with my puny needle. I hadn't expected colossal demon hands wearing jewelry, often seen on neglected merchant wives fondling whoever came within reach. Eventually I began poking them with this worthless sword. As expected, it did absolutely no harm until something peculiar happened. Frost had suddenly appeared on the creature. Though I would never use that weapon again, it had inflicted the monstrosity with icy pain. Interesting. I instantly remembered grabbing a cold wet blade back in the Academy, never even experimenting with its dormant powers. Now, however, having used it on my mace, I revisited the creepy hands far too fond of unwanted touches. It felt remarkably sweet to see layers of ice spread on that disgusting creature. And thus, I continued exploring the manor, killing ghastly hands of all sizes, including the sneaky ones lying in the shadows, waiting for unassuming prey to come by. Running along what seemed to be an old road surrounded by peculiar trees, I dispatched one last demon hand, and finally arrived at an entrance. In this small chamber, listening to the unvoiced whisper of an apparition, I noticed how it mentioned someone called Ranni. Where had I heard that name before? Was she not the daughter of that crazed sorceress in the academy? How marvelous. I had somehow managed to find my way to the daughter of the scorned woman I shredded with my hook claws. Surely she would welcome me with open arms and promises of banquets and comfortable beds. Climbing the nearby stairs, I passed through an empty and dusty chapel. Here, fresh air came from outside, but this time I found myself walking on the top of the large walls inside the manor. Spectral soldiers tried to hinder my approach to whatever they were guarding, giving me no particular resistance. How pathetic. The terrain was unlike anything I had ever experienced, and pushing a lone and noble-looking wolf off a cliff, I contemplated the lands belonging to Rennala's daughter. It was a strange place. Even time didn't seem to pass within its secret gardens. And as it turned out, the manor also boasted sorcerers, absurdly clad fiddlers of magic, secretly yearning for oblivion. I began luring the clever fellows out of their safe space of camaraderie, one at a time. Despite using an embarrassingly simple tactic, the oh-so-bright sorcerers never realized what was happening. After taking out the second lover of large and bearded heads, the remaining degenerate was also tricked into action. What a despicable lack of reasoning. Having finished off the last of the masked hoodlums, I shifted my attention to the troll wielding an absurdly large sword. The knightly brute, maybe rattled by my killing of its only friends, simply fell flat on the stairs. Not wanting it to recover, I crushed what would have been its organs of breeding, had it not been lacking in that regard. How could anyone consider that thing useful? I dodged the impact of its immense weight, but somehow still felt guilty for avoiding it. Despite that lingering sense of cowardice, I just wanted to annihilate this hideous creature. And I did. The troll left me something, though. A very attractive and impressively large sword with a distinct bluish hue. While enabling me to perform some appealing moves, it somehow felt as if a piece was missing. Whatever it was, I clearly wasn't perceptive enough to figure it out, and continued up the flight of stairs. A creature, just standing there, seemed to radiate an objectively misguided sense of style. Truth be told, it was saddening to see this most likely ghoulish-looking servant posing like a desperate kitchen wench waiting for a stolen kiss. Why else bother with a disgusting sack as headgear, if not for ugliness beyond belief? Arriving at an eerie meeting place, I saw a great number of exquisite-looking chairs lined up around a shallow pool. But there were no signs of hostile creatures in this silent space. Only that damned shimmering wall indicated trouble ahead. Delightful. Another night on an enormous steed. But whoever this warrior was, it was also apparent that it had to be some sort of phantom, except for the fact that it delivered lethal blows, and did so generously, several times. As I lay dying, I wondered to myself, what was that knight even guarding? It didn't take long, though, for me to find a suitable approach for the shimmering apparition, and as I finally caved in and embraced the mating ritual of dodging and avoiding blows, I managed to punish every single attack. Until I didn't. There was something terribly wearisome about this rider. The fight itself wasn't particularly enticing, nor did the knight with all of the ornamental sorceries present a noble challenge. It was merely tedious, but it reminded me of something important. If I ever were to return to Limgrave, I would have to pay a visit to another knight, one with a majestic and golden steed. Being reminded of that brute was the true reward here. Growing desperate, the transparent ghost of a knight conjured forth arrows, including one of enormous proportions, and it came at me with uncanny speed. Had it not been for my acceptance of peasant rituals, I would surely have died. In the wake of the battle, I just stood there in the middle of that strange pool, catching my breath. There was nothing here except for the wind and the absence of those who once upon a time gathered in the circle. Why had the knight guarded this place? It had obviously been protecting something valuable or someone important. After pondering the nature of this abandoned site, I left, and found myself in a foggy and mysterious terrain with an ominous-looking tower looming close by. Wandering through this crystal-infected landscape, I couldn't help but sigh in resignation as I saw another one of those elderly dragons. It had not done anything wrong, and who was I to attack ancient animals just minding their own business? Sneaking nobly around that innocent piece of nature, I entered a tower full of books, urns, and crystals, and a statue of some long-dead girl, preoccupied for eternity in what appeared to be a prayer. There was no one here, and the tower felt empty. Yet something lingered in the back of my mind. Finally, at the end of a nauseating stairway, I entered a small chamber and abruptly came to a halt. Who was this creature? Slowly approaching the lavishly clad sorceress, I made my presence known.
A Tarnished here. Thou must have some business in mind to come all this way, though I have no memory of inking thee an invitation.
And then I noticed this sleeping beauty had 4 hands.
No reason in particular thou claimest.
For some reason, though, and despite of being visibly confused by my unannounced arrival, she wanted me to work for her.
Wilt thou enter into my service? I am the witch Ranni.
So, it was the helpful daughter after all. I was not surprised, but did knights truly enlist for nothing more than a suggestive smile? Sadly, weakness of the flesh made men dull-witted. On the other hand, not wanting to offend the admittedly captivating lady of these lands, I agreed to her offer.
I see. A choice well made. Thou art a rare sword. There is, in my service, a half-woven warrior by the name of Blythe. I would have thee join him in searching for the hidden treasure of Nokron.
I must admit, a quest for a hidden treasure did sound intriguing, and with a companion for once, one who was already waiting for me downstairs.
Ah, and there wilt thou find Iji, my war counselor.
Was she talking about that gentle troll whom I had met just prior to my arrival? I then began noticing some odd things about her, one of which was related to her body. Several of her limbs seemed to be sewn together. Wait, had I just accepted a soft-spoken blue doll with 4 hands and a beguiling smile as my mistress? But it didn't matter. We were all broken. Heading down to the servants waiting for me below, I realized with some ambivalence that I was slowly beginning to get acquainted with the lands between. Such a strange world. And there he was. Just as Ranni had mentioned, I found Iji waiting for me with that distinctive patience of his. But how come he appeared to be an apparition?
Lady Ranni has explained everything.
Even so, I thoroughly enjoyed talking to that gentle troll again, feeling genuinely relieved that he also served this sorceress, because it was known how a cruel master would never enjoy loyalty from truly noble beings.
I will give you whatever guidance I can, and pray for your success.
Parting ways and going further down the stairs, I met a tall and wolfish individual with an imposing sword. He introduced himself and began to explain the plan. But I became distracted. My thoughts kept returning to his magnificent sword, and I wondered what it would feel like to wield it. His cloak also seemed both dashing and comfortable. Maybe the armor wouldn't even need to be fitted.
I'm situated in Limgrave right now.
It was during this conversation that it dawned on me how the ghostly aura around both this wolf dressed like a man and the kind troll was some sort of magical projection. This meant something else as well, namely that the knight I had bested hours ago was alive somewhere. On my way out of the tower, I encountered the last servant mentioned, but this one had a slightly unpleasant air about him.
I see. You must be Ranni's new hireling.
Thus, I met a most pompous gossiper, greedily slurping his own words.
I am Selvis, preceptor in the sorcerous arts. I don't know what it is the mistress sees in a provincial tarnished like you, but since we have the misfortune of serving the same lady, I ask that you kindly try not to...
Despite me knowing that he wasn't really here, I approached him with a strong desire to rip out his conceitful tongue and feed it to the wolves outside.
I reside in another tower close by. Come and pay me a visit.
I think I would like that very much, and maybe even bring him gifts of pain and suffering while I was at it.
If it were up to me, I wouldn't waste my time on the likes of you. But who am I to stand against the wishes of my lady?
I already knew that I would meticulously enjoy murdering this venom-spewing and slick sorcerer. A long journey lay ahead of me, even with dear Torrent helping me cross the endless and swampy lakes of Liurnia. In the end, I had to return to Stormvale Castle to reach my destination. Despite my visceral disdain for that fortress of dismemberment, I would have to wander its dark hallways before returning to the grassy hills of Limgrave. Be that as it may, I relished the thought of leaving this region of dampness and wicked sorcery. I was done with these wetlands and the suffocating fog, and I didn't want to hear the distant bells of mutated ghouls, nor think of kind-hearted thops slowly being eaten by worms in that demeaning and remote corner of the academy. I was done with Liurnia. To hell with it.